Good morning. I'm Christopher Cabaldon. I'm the mayor of the city of West Sacramento and your moderator for today. And so welcome to our session on college and career readiness and what cities and mayors can do in conjunction with our partners in the public and private sector to advance college and career readiness and prosperity for all in our communities. I'm joined today by my colleague from across the river in California, the mayor of Sacramento, Darrell Steinberg, who has been a member of the Sacramento City Council, a member of the California State Assembly, and the chair of its budget committee, the president of the Senate of the state of California, and now in his first term as the mayor of the capital city of Sacramento, with a great deal of accomplishments, but also major initiatives in the field of college and career readiness. And by Mayor Karen Freeman-Wilson, the mayor of Gary, Indiana, who has been a judge, the Attorney General of Indiana, and a change maker in a variety of domains, pretty much all domains of life and of battling poverty and injustice, in crime in her community and across the country. She's also the chair of the Criminal and Social Justice Committee for the U.S. Conference of Mayors and the vice president of the National League of Cities. We have a distinguished panel, and we're here in part because across America, it's the mayors of the United States that are taking an unexpected leadership role in transforming the shape of educational and economic opportunity. It is true for all three of us, but it's true for the vast majority of mayors in America that mayors have virtually no legal authority over our schools. We have what you might call supermarket, or what we used to call post office authority, which is to say, hey, Mayor Freeman-Wilson in the milk aisle, what are you doing about my kid who's in third grade and she just changed teachers and now there's only got substitutes? What are you doing about that? So we have that kind of authority, but we don't have any control over school districts or schools. Most mayors don't appoint superintendents or school boards. And yet, most of our citizens expect that as the leader of the community, that education and the opportunities that are available for young people in our communities are fundamental to our job, and therefore they are, regardless of what the Constitution may say. But for a long time, mayors have played around the edges. For decades, the principal work of mayors was to rally local companies to adopt a school, or to, in the 80s and 90s, begin to work on joint use programs between parks and schools, and after-school programs as well. In the 90s and in the first part of this century, mayors began to become more involved in calling for bigger improvements in areas around preschool education. Mayors in many communities became at the forefront of the charter school movement as well, to try to assist and also put some pressure on their local schools to close the achievement gap. And in many, many cities, mayors have been very active in school board elections in a last-ditch effort, of moment of frustration, to try to change the table of decision-making in their schools. But what we've seen in the last few years are mayors stepping up in dramatically different ways and comprehensive ways, and many of them outside of the classroom. Whether it's in places like Chicago or Boston or Oakland, or in my own city, or in the cities we're going to hear from in just a moment, mayors who are taking a cradle to career, a cradle to prosperity approach to education in conjunction with, but not principally through, their schools. In cities like mine, where universal preschool is the beginning of that work, that happens outside of the traditional school system for the most part. In my city, then, where every child is entitled to universal preschool, followed by a college savings account that we open for each kindergartner that completes preschool, and then universal paid internships for high school students in college and career pathways, free community college for high school graduates in my community who are ready for college, and then scholarships for any form of post-secondary education that are driven by digital badges that students earn for skill building, for accomplishments, and for achievements, and for community service while they're teenagers. And although mine's the best in the country, there are many, many mayors around America that are doing similar things at that level of ambition, which is everything other than the classroom all the way through. In Stockton, in Oakland, in Dallas, as I say, in Boston and Chicago, and all around the country. And this is a sea change in the role that mayors are playing and the level of responsibility that mayors are accepting. And so today we want to talk about why, but also how, the shape of the mayoral role and the mayoral partnerships with both in education and in the community and in the private sector are helping to drive that. So we're gonna discuss this a little bit here, and then we're gonna ask for your questions. So if you haven't already, and as we're wrapping up the final day of EDU, to ask a question, go to slido.com and enter the hashtag South by Southwest EDU, and we're in room 12AB, and so we really want to encourage your questions all through, and then we'll be engaging our distinguished panel as we go forward. So let me start with you, Mayor Steinberg, because although you're the newest mayor of the three of us, you've bridged the divide between
apprentice. I'm an apprentice.
Yes. No,
Careful.
Yes. But you didn't start this work as mayor or even in the state legislature, and you've had some moments that I've heard you talk about, both in the community or in Switzerland or elsewhere, where you're thinking about what the role of a community and how students learn and how it can result in prosperity really can work, and then what policy and mayors can do.
Thank you very much, mayors. It's an honor to be with you. You know, for me, I look at the way we have set up government throughout the country. A lot of good things about what we do, but one of the things that just is striking is how we separate jurisdictions and responsibilities, and then if you're on one side of the divide, you don't have any formal responsibility for things on the other side of the divide. And so it is with communities and schools. As a mayor now, I recognize that the success of my city is absolutely dependent upon whether or not we educate and prepare young people for the future economy. In Sacramento, in West Sacramento, we're undergoing this incredible renaissance. We're becoming a cosmopolitan region, more than a capital city, more than just a government town, tech, innovation, food. And I always say that we'll be a very good city if we accomplish all of that and create more destination amenities. But if we want to be a great city, we have to connect that growth to the neighborhoods, and especially the kids in our neighborhoods. And so it's no longer a luxury for any of us as mayors to say, well, that's the responsibility of the school district, or that's the responsibility of the Workforce Development Board. This is our responsibility. And for me, it started when I was in the state legislature, when I got frustrated with the fact that in the education system, that high schools especially are evaluated based upon the results of standardized test scores. And all that incentivized and encouraged, in my view, was a teaching to the test and the lack of flexibility in developing curriculum that was both academically rigorous but also career relevant. So I had the fortune or misfortune during the recession to lead the Senate in California, but had the bully pulpit to say the issue of integrating academic rigor and career application must be a top-tier state priority. So we changed the evaluation process to make test scores not so predominant, and then working with Mayor Cabaldon and other mayors, we put together a $1.4 billion investment, originally called the Career Pathways Trust, to invest in city, school, business, community collaborations throughout California to build out career pathways for high school students. And then I become mayor and no longer have the power or the authority to legislate.
Or $1.5 billion.
We do have $1.5 billion. And so I view my role now as being the bridge and the glue between the business community, the state government, and the public educators, all who are in their silos doing what they do. We started a project called 1,000 Strong where we aim to provide 1,000 year-round paid work experiences for high school students in Sacramento. First year, 300. Not bad. But we aspire to get to 1,000. But the idea here is to begin building out these pathways so that every young person has yes, the opportunity and ability to go to college, because it's college and career, not college or career, but also apprenticeship, and to understand the relevance between what they're learning and what they might do in their lives. That's the only way we're going to build out a 21st century workforce. So it's been a good journey for me. I'd say one final thing about the role of mayors, that being pro tem president of the Senate was more powerful than being mayor of Sacramento. Being mayor is much more prominent. And so the opportunity to use that bully pulpit and to be able to sort of force or encourage these kinds of collaborations, it's a tremendous opportunity, and people are looking to mayors and civic leaders to do just this.
Mayor Freeman-Wilson, I mean, I mean, it's unusual for a mayor to have been a judge and also the state attorney general and have the breadth of experience that you have when we get this wrong. And so I'm curious, you know, your perspectives, having been mayor for longer than an apprentice, not quite postdoc yet, but getting there.
Sure.
How do we approach these issues when we're talking about you know, not around the kids that the system's never served well, if we're going to be able to, you know, rescue our cities?
So, Mayor Cabaldon, I want to thank you first for the nicest way that I've ever heard anyone say, I can't keep a job. But it is an honor to certainly join both of you, and you're right. I do see and have seen what happens when the educational system does not work. I've seen it just about from every side of the criminal justice system. And you talked earlier about the fact that as mayors, we really don't have a lot of control, official control, over the educational systems. And so early on in my tenure, I walked around talking about that fact. We don't have any control, we don't have any authority, that's not up to me. And then very quickly, I had the light bulb come on that if you don't take control or at least assume responsibility, which is somewhat different from control, we know, then you're not going to be able to get anything done. And if you talk about creating ladders of opportunity for those who have lived in poverty in generations, then you have to do something about the educational system. And so what we started to do was to really look at how effective our schools were. And what we found that half of our students are in charter schools, half of them are in traditional public schools, and neither of the school systems was knocking it out of the park. You had some schools that were traditional, you have some schools that were public charter that were doing well, but as a whole, neither system was doing the students justice. So I looked at ways, I worked with both systems to say, what are ways that as a city government, we can collaborate, we can partner. And initially it started in the traditional areas, snow removal, groundskeeping, public safety issues. But then we moved into the realm of programming, out of school time. How do we support special projects that are going on in the school? How do we allow young people to really learn about government and learn about other aspects? We started a robust summer job program for the first time that really focused on students and partnered with schools to get students in who were interested in government careers. And that's been successful, and it was done with the help of the state. And then we also looked at those areas where students needed extra support. Sometimes it had to do with food, and so we formed a robust partnership with our local food bank. Sometimes it had to do with housing and other things, and so we became another resource for school social workers, for school principals, when there was a challenge with students that they could not necessarily solve easily. And so those are just basic things But when you have a school population, both traditional and public charter, that are 100% of them on free and reduced lunches, you know, those minor things make a major difference. The last area that I have been involved in by necessity is the finances. Not in providing finances, but our school system, our traditional school system, imploded because they had a $100 million debt. And so initially we went to the state to say, we need some help. And so they provided some support, but it became increasingly clear that there was not going to be a clear solution or long-term solution unless there was more state involvement. And that was a little dicey. It was dicey for me because of, you know, the traditional challenges between state government and local government. It's certainly been a challenge for the school corporation because just recently, as they have changed the level of help, they have also looked to really minimize the involvement and the influence of a locally elected school board, something that I've strongly disagreed with. But it's one of those things, you know, if you ask for the help, then you have a difficult time controlling how that help comes. And people tend to think that if you're asking for the help, then you're giving them carte blanche to control your life. So, you know, that's another conversation for another day, but it does all relate to the effectiveness of education. And so my solution has been to say, you know, let's just clear the drawing board and start all over. But and that's something that I'm actually working on.
I think we have one thing, or maybe in common, or a thread that's bound us together that we may not even know about. So I think last week, the 21st Century Charter School in Gary,
Yes,
which has been nationally prominent for
yes,
some of its work, signed up to join this digital badging system in a health academy.
Yes.
They just signed up last week. I saw it show up on the reports. And that digital badge, and it's a health badge that's been developed by in partnership between health pathway teachers in schools and a particular hospital leading the way. That hospital is Sutter Hospital in Sacramento, which is where the badge was developed, in part to support the 1,000 Strong initiative that Mayor Steinberg has described. So Sutter, they're a company, it's a nonprofit hospital system, supported the development with teachers of a series of digital badges to mark out different levels of and types of skills that could then be recognized outside of that, anywhere else through this badge system. And the expectation was that those badges could be recognized by an employer in West Sacramento, across the river from Sutter in Sacramento. But what's happened is, because it is digital, it is now visible in Gary, Indiana. And so what we're seeing, I think, is something that mayors about 2 years ago, a ragtag group of us all thought we might be able to do this, which is tackle the signaling problem that we're facing with degrees for both employers and for young people and training institutions that are trying to prepare them for the workforce, where our traditional system of relying on degrees alone to signal a whole bunch of skills and attributes and dispositions is no longer sufficient. We not from you, but we stole Bayer Crop Science, which is it's the leading company in the country around biologics. Their U.S. headquarters is in my city. When they opened, they needed to hire a whole bunch of lab technicians. Now they have scientists. What they needed were folks who were comfortable in lab procedures and knew all the safety regulations and knew how to work in a lab. So they put the notices out and require a bachelor's degree in chemistry or biology or a similar laboratory-based field. And virtually nobody in my city could meet that requirement. We have the highest number of jobs in our county and the highest unemployment rate at the same time. We have like 2 jobs per person, and 10% of the people are unemployed. And it's for this reason, right? So people didn't have the bachelor's degree in biology or chemistry. But when you actually go in the lab, you don't need a bachelor's degree in biology or chemistry just to clean the test tubes and make sure everything's in the right place and organize the chemicals properly. You don't need that. The degree does signal that, because if you got the bachelor's degree, you did take years and years and years and years of a laboratory. But to require a BA in that subject for that one skill or one bundle of skills was over signaling what you needed to do. And as a result, they have unfilled positions and we have unemployed people. It's not actually a skills gap, which is what we've been talking about, is a gap in skills. It's a signaling gap, right? So the company cannot see a skill that somebody has, having worked in a laboratory. And they might have gotten that skill working in a laboratory as an intern, for example, and they didn't working for that very same company or for a company down the road. And so part of our purpose in developing digital badges was to try to bridge that gap and say, okay, here are micro-credentials of specific skills that may ladder up to a degree or to a college certificate. And as mayors, we said, look, how could we do this? Because it's a little bit disruptive to the traditional university and college system, so somebody else is going to have to do it. We can't just rely on the colleges to do it, so let's do it. Dallas and Chicago began, and then we joined with LA and a couple of other cities in the country to start developing these. It's hard, right, to develop the badges, but it's also hard, and I think we have already had a question about this, about how to get employers and colleges to really use them. I think in the first round of digital badge development, mayors around the country were starting to develop, with their partners, were developing mayor's summer reading badge or what have you, and they were great, but nobody used them. Right. So like, why encourage young people to go out and earn badges if they don't mean anything? And so that's been a fundamental challenge, is how to get employers and colleges, when they're reviewing applicants for admission, to say, that badge, I recognize that counts for something. So we've been doing both a little bit of bully pulpit, and then, as I say, when we're about to launch a scholarship program based on digital badges, and that's a major reason, is we want to say to other employers, this digital badge counts for our scholarship, and therefore you might want to look at it too. So we're trying to create both supply and demand at the same time for those badges in order to meet the needs that 21st Century Charter and that SETA are trying to accomplish in your cities too.
Well, you've been a leader in this area for the Conference of Mayors, and I just want to commend you on that. I remember you talking about digital badges early on, and I think that we have to move in that direction, because to the extent that it is not a skills gap, as you said, but mainly a communications gap and a clarifications gap. And through the digital badging, you're able to really clarify what you need, what the position requires, what skill set students have, and you're able to really talk about skill sets that are not traditionally acknowledged. If you have to cook breakfast and take care of 4 younger siblings, that's a skill set. And it's not one that everyone has. And so by digital badging, you're able to take those non-traditional skill sets into account. You talked about the 21st Century Scholars Organization. When I talked about those that are successful, that is absolutely one of the most successful, not just because of this cutting edge program, but because of what they do with their dual degree work as well. We've had, I think, one of the first students in the country to get her high school diploma and her bachelor's degree within a month of each other, which is significant, particularly if you're a parent who's looking at college expenses.
So significant that you had the Secretary of Education come by, right?
We did. We did.
All right.
Can I just say, I think this idea of digital badging is brilliant. And you can see, right, whether it's 5 or 10 or 15 years from now, that this is going to grow to scale. It does speak, I think, in the big picture, to a particular challenge when it comes to this work. And I call it culture change, right? It's culture change. Now, community colleges throughout our state and throughout the country are sort of the best laboratories, if you will, for combining college and career. But at the secondary school level, though we have pioneered academies and pathway programs, I maintain that there is still a significant culture divide between the public educators and the people producing jobs and employing people. And somebody asked a question here. In California, we have the local control funding formula and an evaluation system called LCAP, where one of 8 priorities that schools are supposed to be measured under are college and career readiness. And nobody really knows what it means. Nobody really knows what it means. How are we going to bring life to that evaluation component? Christopher and I, Mayor Cabaldon and I always go back and forth. He talks about digital badging, which I think, again, is brilliant. I talk about curriculum. Are we going to get to a place where lead industries are going to be helping develop the curriculum in high schools and in community college so that, again, there's some integration between the science course being taught to the senior in high school or the community college science course and the digital badge? That disconnect between finishing school and what you get out of that and the badge concept, preparing young people for the modern workforce, I think there's a whole lot more work that needs to be done to integrate that. I can tell you with 1,000 Strong, again, our pilot project in Sacramento, the single biggest challenge we have had is convincing employers that hiring high school students is actually consistent with their bottom line and what they need. I say to employers all the time, this is not charity. You know, in a way, I'm not asking you for a favor, even though I am. This is in your interest to begin creating the pipeline of your next generation's workforce, but it's a hard sell because we aren't set up that way. Badging has the potential, I think, to really bridge that gap, but it's culture change. Public schools are not just to produce graduates, or to produce graduates that are prepared to do more than one thing.
That's really true. My dream on one digital badge that I really want to build, but it gets to some of these issues about both production and acceptance, is we have a reducing but still not trivial gang challenge in the community. And there are, and you know this, both of you know this, there are young people in the community that have developed the skills to counsel their younger, siblings or cousins or community or neighbors not to go into the gang,
Yes.
right, and to find out other alternatives. This is not an easy. We're not good at this, and it's not just that they're peers. It's also that they are developing skills around the act of counseling. And we don't, and they participate in nonprofit groups and in community organizations. They work with our county social services group, but they have the amount of energy and time and accomplishment and skill that they're developing is in no way marked later on. They can put it on a resume that nobody reads because it doesn't get through the AI spider.
Sure.
But there's no marker of something that is extraordinarily meaningful and significant in their life. What we did in City Hall, in order to try to lead on the digital badge of ourselves, was we both have, and I'm probably, you described it, Gary, too, we're all doing either summer employment or internship programs for young people.
Right.
We said, okay, if we're going to do this digital badge, proselytizing, we need to do it ourselves. And so we took what used to be just you come and work in the planning department or in the public works department, like a regular internship, and we built the curriculum for it. And so it generates a set of badges, but those badges then lead to other things. So you do a badge in public works, and that badge then opens up the possibility of now being able to do a higher level internship in public works, maybe an internship over at the Building Industry Association, right? It gives you pathways that are choices, but pathways to other opportunities that open up as you do each of these pieces. And it has caused us to make those internships much more real, right? Because we've actually had to think about them. And this, I think, has been one of the challenges with employers and internships, is that we've tended to treat young people like widgets and say, okay, engineering firm, please take 3 interns, and then we drop off 3 random high school students who happen to be available Thursdays at 2 o'clock to 4 o'clock. When if we already know that, okay, we have an engineering academy at the school, And we have students that have been studying engineering for 2 or 3 years, and it's their passion. They've gone to they've done 2 job shadows. They've done a juried project. They've won a competition at the university. That's who we should be sending to the engineering firm, both because it's the right thing for that young person, but at the end of that experience, the engineering firm is much more likely to say, send me more of those interns.
Right.
Right.
When we just send the generic ones and say, we know you can't even deal with your own 13-year-old at home or your own 15-year-old. Now here's a random one. You're an engineer. Now you have to be now you have to be a teacher, and you have to be a teacher and walk through this journey with this young person. It's asking more of an employer for a lower payoff than we can achieve, given the data that we already have, what we already know, either from badging or from enrollment patterns or what have you, about what a student's readiness is to be an effective intern that can apply the learning that they're having in the classroom to the internship experience.
But that concept, those concepts are consistent whether you have digital badging or not. It's just common sense. You connect the young people with employers that share their interests. And we do this, we have a internship program during the year where it's called the JAG program, and it's a national program. And what happens is they get to work part-time during school, those young people who have enough credits to graduate. And generally it's juniors and seniors. And what happens is that they go to those areas that they express an interest in. They spend about 60 days, the first 60 days of school, sort of just developing, talking about their interests. But the other thing that you talked about in terms of young people that develop counseling skills and so many other skills, it's about really teaching them how to market themselves, how to talk about what they've done and why it matters. I mean, a person who has been a team captain has special leadership skills, but someone who has set the bench, like I did as a basketball player, that takes skills too, because you have to be a motivator. You're cheering your team on. So, normally you look for the captain because that captain has the leadership, but you also should look for other role players on sports teams, those who are involved in the chess club and other extracurricular activities, because I think they really do make a difference.
Just a digression, but it just reminds me, every time I go to a high school to meet with students to talk, I say, why isn't public speaking a mandatory course in secondary school?
Right.
We emphasize reading and writing, of course, and they're crucial, but the ability, or at least the practice, to gain the confidence to speak in a small group setting, to speak in a public setting is so crucial to success. And it builds confidence, and we really undervalue that skill, I think, in a significant way. So I think a badge for public speaking is the next task, Mayor.
Well, we did have a question about badging for soft skills as well, and it gets, this is our, a lot of my school friends say, would companies just tell us what they want? And then we ask companies, and the CEO says, well, we can train for all of the, all the hard skills. What we really need is, young people who show up on time and have grit and determination or what have you. Of course, then you go to HR and you look at their, with the job announcements, and it's a requirement for the following 17 hard skills.
Right.
So it's not, it's like who you ask in the company. Just like if you ask a mayor or somebody in the Parks Department, you might get different answers too. But this has been a big challenge. How do you badge for or issue micro-credentials for the quote-unquote soft skills? And that is happening in Sacramento, and we're trying it some as well. But there are more and more places that are constructing badges, I think under 2 different streams. Some are attempting assessments of soft skills, online or in human interviews or what have you, to try to get young people's knowledge about the soft skills, which is something knowing about is some evidence of at least mindfulness around those soft skills. Others are trying to construct an index essentially of soft skills by various experiences. So it might be that you have the basketball team badge, and you have the you did a Habitat for Humanity project that required you to do a bunch of things. That there's a set of badges that together are an index signal of readiness in some of the soft skills areas, in addition to the hard skills. But it is one of the tough nuts. And it's when you describe what's held up so much of the college and career readiness piece and the issue of, well, what do we mean by college and career readiness? My experience is that people mostly say that about a career readiness. Yeah. That there's a large comfort level about what we mean by college readiness, which is thoroughly unjustified. I think you've heard me say this before, but that because most of us that are having the debate about college and career readiness went to college, we're quite comfortable that the indicators of college readiness must have been pretty good because they produced us. So, well, yeah, grades, SAT scores, and what have you. We know what produces good college measures. Sure. It must be, because look at me, and I should have gone to college, and I'm the right one. But for career readiness, that's so nebulous. I can't even imagine how we would assess career readiness. And the answer is we're not that good at either one, but we have to do both of them. Right? Harvard or Berkeley or Sac State or whatever have to admit a class of students, and the measures of college preparation that we have they could be much better, but they have to work right now. And the same thing is true with career readiness, and I think this is where we struggled in California, where folks said, let's just not even, we can't measure it, so we're not going to consider it at all until we know what the perfect answer for career readiness is. And I think what we're seeing is through these kind of initiatives at the local level in cities, where we don't have a choice. You can't wait for the perfect to come out 6 years from now, that we're kind of just bootstrapping in measures of career readiness to try to meet the needs of young people, especially young people who are dislocated youth and out of the school system, to connect them to real opportunity.
Go ahead, Mayor, I'm sorry.
No, I was just going to say that we have somewhat of an advantage in Indiana because of our manufacturing background, because of our work in the building trades, that there's a much easier path from high school or K-12 education into a career that does not require a 2-year or a 4-year degree. You can get a certificate. You can become an apprentice. You can start that during high school, and there are a large number of opportunities for that. And, we struggle because, of course, when you talk about college, you're talking about debt in many instances, whether you're talking about a 2-year, because not many cities have that free community college education, or a 4-year degree. And the question then becomes, do you steer students towards this certificate and towards the building trades, or do you steer them towards the 2-year or 4-year institution, or do you let them choose, giving them as much information as you can? And obviously, I think the answer is number 3, but, as adults, we tend to say, well, you don't want all that debt. And you often decide for young people who may have other aspirations and certainly other opportunities.
I think all of us here as 21st century policymakers, I'm big on data. I love outcome-based measurement. And I believe in it, but maybe when it comes to career readiness, we're missing something. Maybe it's more about measuring the inputs. And what I mean by that is there really any substitute to formal or informal mentoring between an adult and a young person who may not know about the soft skills, sure, or learn about the soft skills? That may be the way that we measure, right? Every young person, every adult who had a hard background who is successful, you can probably point to an adult who intervened, who believed, who saw something in them. And maybe that's the measure, I would suggest, as opposed to struggling with what is the career readiness outcome. A young person is going to gain confidence and learn from their mistakes when they have a caring, loving adult. Could be a parent, could be a family member, it could be a teacher, it could be a counselor, it could be a mentor. But I suggest in this area, career readiness, it could be more about that input than anything else.
I agree with that concept. The challenge is in cities like Gary and so many others, there are not enough adults to go around.
Yeah.
And that's where adults have to step up, quite frankly.
Yeah, I think that I mean, even thinking about some of the challenges we've had with college completion as an example, and it's community college completion in particular. In California, the completion rate, the rate of students completing anything, not just a transfer to a university or an associate degree, but any objective, can be as low as 20%. Right? If those colleges happen to be owned by DeVry or something like that, we would be prosecuting them for fraud.
Absolutely.
I'm a former community college vice chancellor, so I am speaking out of school, but former, right?
Right.
But the point, I mean, it's a horrible rate of completion, and in part, what we discovered was, or has been, that we left too much to the student. You know, whether this was the 1960s free love and free choice of community college programs, where we said, okay, here, welcome to Sacramento City Community College, West Sacramento campus. Here is your catalog of 2,000 courses organized by departments or whatever. Good luck.
Yeah.
Right? You have all the autonomy. We want you to be the master of your own universe. And for most of the young people entering that college, they're the first one in their family to go. They have none of those supports. And we're saying to them, even though we've served 100 million students in California community colleges over our lifetime, so we have actually a fair amount of data and evidence about if you're entering this college because you want to go into nursing or you want to go into digital media and design. We have good, even without Watson or artificial intelligence, we have good knowledge and evidence about what you should be doing first.
Right.
And not. But instead, our tradition has been, it's all up to you. You know, your guess is as good as ours. And then when the students fail because they delay their math course till the very end, or they take the wrong sequence of courses, or they take classes they're not ready for, that then we're like, well, it just happened. You know, these poor students. If only we had better preschool, they would be fine. No, if we had just had better pathways for them, so that they could make those choices that you've described, Mayor Freeman-Wilson, but they could make the choices with the scaffolding of what they need. Okay, here you just completed this course. Here's now the three. You should choose from one of these three, or even better, we've already enrolled you in the next class. You can unenroll and pick another one if you want to, but we've made the default pattern the pattern that we know, because you said you came here for nursing. Most policymakers are like, but you know, you're here for nursing, welcome, but you need to spend a couple of years just exploring, you know, and thinking about your life and learning, you know, learning the key precepts of Western civilization, whatever. You're like, I'm all up for that if I can finish my nursing degree and get a job in nursing. And we have to reconcile that, and so providing the ladders and the guided pathways and the stackable certificates and degrees and whatever are essential to making that choice real. In order to avoid all that debt and to avoid all that failure. So we did have so here's a question about evidence and best practices and return on investment. And, you know, as mayors, you're getting 1,000, even just in the field of college and career readiness, 1,000 different potential things you could be doing any day, right? Somebody will come to you at the supermarket and say, Mayor, if we have to deal with, if we solved youth homelessness, we would solve the problem of college and career readiness. So that's what you ought to do. Mayor, if we just got a little bit more gluten-free food in the second grade school lunches. So there's 1,000 things. It's even worse than being a superintendent because you control police and fire and parks and everything else.
I was out with my pothole crew yesterday.
Yeah. So how do you decide? How do you decide? And what's the role of like evidence and research, or how much is policy? How do you decide what of all the menu of things that you could do to improve college and career and opportunity and prosperity, what to do?
I think you have to look at the best practices, look at evidence-based, look at the data, because in our world, there are limited resources, and some of us have fewer resources than others. And so when you make that spin, when you make those decisions, you have to make sure that you're making the decisions for the right programs, for proven interventions, for proven measures. And so evidence-based practices are extremely important. You know, one of the things that we're looking at is the disproportionate detention, incarceration, expulsion of young boys of color. young men of color. And in order to make a determination, first you have to have the data to see whether or not that is something you think it's happening. Is it really happening? And once you determine that it's happening, how do you prevent it from happening? Why is it happening? Is it because folks are making arbitrary decisions, or is there behavior that really drives those decisions? And are there programs, proven, evidence-based programs, that will get you to a place that will make them less likely to commit those offenses, or that will allow teachers to look at behavior in a different way and not be as reactionary? Because I think that there are challenges and solutions on both sides of that spectrum and that equation.
I'd say, I agree, evidence-based practice combined with inspiration is key, because whatever you're leading, you have to believe in your head and your heart. And I know as mayor, you're right, Christopher, 1,000 things come at you that are your responsibility. But you must have your own 2 or 3 things that you're really trying to drive. And I've learned over time that you'll be measured in the end by how you handle the 1,000 things, of course, but really whether you accomplish something on the 2 or 3 things you choose to work on. That's true in the legislature. That's true as mayor of a city. That's true as a community leader. And I think there's always a danger in spreading your policy ideas a mile wide and an inch deep, especially with limited resources. I would rather do 2 things really well than 20 things in a mediocre way, just to be able to say, well, I worked on and did these 20 things. Do what you do well. And that's why I chose this 1,000 strong. I recognize it's not everything, but if it can succeed and then be exported, if you will, to create the broader pathway, as Christopher said, from cradle to grave, then we will have started something. Really, really important in public and community life to choose something or 2 things that you're passionate about, that motivate you, and build something that's great, as opposed to many things not so great.
That requires a lot of political will. I mean, because people are coming at you daily with the latest bright idea. And some of the ideas are really good.
Sure.
So if they don't fit into that wheelhouse, I mean, there are some things that folks can do and they only need a little help from the city. But most of the things that they come with, they need a lot of help for the city. And to be able to say, these are my areas of focus, these 2 things, I think is the right thing. But I'm just pointing out that, on a 4-year cycle, or for some on a 2-year cycle, that's a challenge.
The 2 things, by the way, need to be emblematic of broader issues.
Sure.
They can't be, 2 small things,
Right.
2 large things, or 3. I'm for 3, by the way, or 4, but but not more than that.
Right. But they're emblematic so that they create a space and a backwind behind others who might want to take on other things. That it's not
Exactly.
you, but that can wrap themselves in that larger initiative.
Yeah, I want 1,000 strong to take a number of I want it to grow in ways that I could never have imagined, and frankly, without my direct involvement. Right? It's like you seed something and let it grow.
All right, so our most popular Slido question of the day, mayors, is maybe related to Amazon HQ2 as an example, which is with all the giant tax breaks that cities might potentially be giving to companies and to businesses, can we require them to get involved with curriculum development, as you mentioned, Mayor Steinberg, and internships from high schools? So can we draw a closer link between tax policies at the city level or the state level and what we expect businesses to do as part of what we've talked about today?
I think we have,
And we all had Amazon bids.
yeah.
You did?
And, you know, I don't know that Amazon is the best example because they seem to have the leverage, so to speak. But I think we have done an insufficient job, at least in my city, in connecting public funding with what we want to see on the workforce development side. You know, when we build the major Golden One Center, the downtown sports and entertainment complex, we had a local hiring agreement that was successful, but it didn't really reach back, for example, into the high schools. Now, as we think about local hiring and learning mostly positive lessons from that experience, I want to make it much tighter. I want to say if we are going to contract with you, contractor ABC in the public works arena, or if we're going to give money for anything private sector, it needs to be specifically tied to not only local hiring, but the training and apprenticeship pathways that are going to give me confidence that it's our kids from our neighborhoods that are going to be first in line for these jobs that will be created. But we have more work to do there.
And that's something that we've also done in terms of local hiring, local opportunities, you know, training in the areas that a particular employer needs employees in to just have that exposure, whether it's just a tour. I remember as a teenager, I was able to tour U.S. Steel. And as a result of a quick summer job there, I knew that that wasn't something I wanted to do. There were others who did want to do it, but that wasn't for me. So that exposure means a lot.
Yeah, it saved you and the education system and the public workforce training system a lot of time and money
It
to
did.
figure that
It
out
absolutely did.
early stage. And I think on this tax question, to me, it actually calls out a third lens on this issue of like, Mayor, what do you do? And we talked about having a core set of passion-driven priorities, and also about evidence and data and best practices. But I think the third thing that, at least for me, is critical in that space is pure opportunism. That I think my constituents mostly think I get up in the morning and figure out what shall I do today in order to make my community better, and that's just not how the world works. I get up in the morning.
That's what I do.
And there's, yeah, I know.
I woke up
I
like
get up in the
this.
morning, and there's, you know, the fire department is, you know, dealing with some incident at the local school, and I have to vote on a land use rezoning on a specific place at a specific time. The issue before me is not housing policy; it is that project. I have to sign the contract with the waste hauler company that day or not. So I have there's a set of my day that can intersect with these issues, but I can't just not do all those other things. And I have no power to do anything directly in the workforce and education space, or not very much. So instead, I'm looking, okay, I have to sign the waste hauler contract today. Hey, waste hauler, what are you doing on internships? Right? So it's not, a week ago I wouldn't have asked the waste hauler that, and a week later I will not. But today I have the waste hauler contract. It's not, waste hauling is not the biggest employment sector in the city, but today that's where I have an opportunity to do something. And so I think that the same thing has been true on some of this tax work. For example, the infrastructure package that's pending. You know, there is an opportunity for us to try to, in addition to infrastructure for infrastructure, okay, what about if we're going to spend, if cities mainly, because the federal government's not putting in money into this pot, if cities are going to spend a couple $100 billion or $1 trillion in infrastructure, what can we bake in systematically around apprenticeships and training and the kinds of issues that we've talked about today? There's an opportunity that may be there that wasn't there a year ago, and may not be there may not be there later. Now, we did not put any tax breaks in our Amazon bid, not a single one. In part because we were making the point that this was an opportunity. Amazon's participation in our digital badging work and our free college work and all that was an opportunity for them, not a cost. That this was what their employees were going to be a part of, and what Amazon Web Services and some of their other lines of business would benefit from. And we didn't get it though, so maybe we should have given $100 million worth of tax breaks.
You did the right thing.
I think we did. So we have just a couple minutes. I want to pick up on one last really tiny question, which is the future of work question. So we've talked a lot today about preparation for jobs in the way that we've always thought about them. go intern with an employer so that you can learn how to work for someone in a job. But what about self-directed work and the gig economy and the changing nature of work in the 1 minute that each of you have? I know none of us are really leading in that space yet, but what are your thoughts about how cities and mayors and the curated system of education and workforce development that we're doing ought to be thinking about the changing nature of work?
I think it provides both a challenge and an opportunity. The challenge is for us to think in a totally different way, and that's many of us as mayors, those who are in older generations who did essentially what you referred to, internship, get a job. But the opportunity is that it allows young people in many instances to lead the way, because that is how they absolutely think. That's how they're wired. That is how they have been trained. And so for us to learn from them and to promote those opportunities with newer employers, with the employers of the future, is a real, I think, opportunity for us to grow as cities. And that's one of the reasons why I wanted to come to South by Southwest, to really begin to think that way.
I agree. I'm just thinking up here, maybe we need to change this term soft skills. I don't think it does
For
justice.
sure, for sure, right?
I don't think it does justice to what we're really talking about here. And I don't know what the right term is, but we're really talking about leadership development. We're talking about civic engagement. We're talking about confidence. We're talking about building those sets of skills in young people where they feel like they can do anything with the right kind of help and partnership. I think we undervalue it when we call it a soft skill. It's every bit as important as the academic underpinning, right? They're both important. And that gets back to what we've been talking about here. It's the integration of, yes, academic rigor. That's important. But also genuinely preparing young people for the modern world. And we can do this. It's all right in front of us. Europeans have done it in many ways better than we have. And it's an exciting time. But we have to push politically. We have to continue to make sure that the issue of workforce and education rise up the priority list when it comes to the public policy discussions at all levels.
Yeah, so true.
Sure.
Well, I'm not a digital badge religious fanatic, but I do think
You're right.
things like young people who open a shop on Etsy, for example, and are selling, that's an example of the sort of non-job kind of work that we don't currently recognize in any way, but you could start to imagine that being incorporated. Or what we're looking to challenge a bunch of other cities to do with us is build, many of us are doing internship programs now, but to build entrepreneurship tracks that look just like internships in terms of the structure of how they interact with our workforce development system. So there are, I think, some promising practices on the horizon in cities and in our system. So thank you both to Mayor Darrell Steinberg of the City of Sacramento and Mayor Karen Freeman-Wilson of the City of Gary, Indiana. I'm Christopher Cabaldon, Mayor of West Sacramento,
And thank
California.
you, Mayor
Thank you, Mayor
Cabaldon,
Cabaldon.
for
It's
being
great.
such a great moderator and a
discussion.
leader in this area.
Thanks so much for joining us.